The harvest has been gathered, and the winding paths have led us deep within the castle's cool, stone heart. Here, the air changes, becoming thick with the scent of ancient wood and dry earth. Before us lies a quiet landscape of a different kind. Rounded wooden barrels bound by iron, cool clay jars shaped by forgotten hands, and woven baskets holding the weight of seasons. These are not just containers. They are the silent guardians of life, keeping the world outside at bay. Tonight, we move closer to touch the rough grain and feel the cold surface of history as we explore the shape and texture of the fortress's hidden bounty. If you are listening at night, tell me where you are and what time it is. Welcome to Dreamy Old Stories, where we share slow and gentle stories from history. These stories are made to calm your mind and help you fall asleep. Within the storage spaces of the castle, the containers themselves form a quiet landscape of varied shapes and materials. Wooden barrels stand with rounded sides bound by iron hoops, their surfaces marked by fine lines that follow the grain of the wood. Clay jars sit nearby, wider at the base and narrowing toward their openings, their outer surfaces uneven where hands once shaped them. Woven baskets rest in softer forms, their edges slightly flexible, made from interlaced fibers that curve gently under weight. Rough sacks lie folded or filled, their fabric coarse and loosely structured, adjusting to whatever they hold inside. To come close to these objects is to notice how each one carries its own set of sensations. The wood of a barrel feels firm yet slightly textured, with faint ridges that can be traced by touch. Clay jars offer a cooler surface, smoother in some places and rougher in others, holding a quiet contrast beneath the hand. Baskets carry a lighter presence, their woven strands creating a subtle pattern that shifts with pressure. Sacks feel softer but uneven, their surfaces responding to movement in a way that reflects the shape of what they contain. Each material brings a different quality into the space. Over time, these containers begin to show small signs of change, shaped by use and by what they hold. The wood of barrels darkens in places where moisture has settled, creating variations in tone across their surfaces. Clay jars may develop faint marks or slight cracks, not enough to break their form but enough to reveal their age. The fibers of baskets loosen gradually, adjusting their shape with repeated use, while sacks become worn along their edges, their fabric softening where it has been handled most often. These changes gather slowly, forming a quiet record of their role. For those who work with these containers, there is an understanding that comes not from instruction, but from repeated contact. The weight of a filled sack, the balance of a jar, the way a barrel moves when rolled all become familiar through experience. Each object carries a sense of purpose that is felt rather than explained, guiding how it is used and where it belongs. In this way, the containers are more than simple tools. They become part of the larger rhythm of storage, holding not only food, but a quiet knowledge shaped through time. Some containers carry details that are easy to overlook at a distance but become clear when seen closely. The lids of clay jars rest with slight irregularity, shaped to fit but never perfectly aligned, leaving a thin edge where air meets the interior. Barrel tops are secured with wooden plugs or fitted boards, each one slightly different in size and placement, reflecting the hand that made it. Baskets sometimes include tighter weaving along their rims, reinforcing the edges where weight gathers most often. Sacks are tied with simple cords, knotted in ways that can be undone and redone without difficulty, allowing them to be opened and closed as needed. The experience of handling these features brings a quieter awareness of how each container responds to touch. The resistance of a wooden lid feels firm at first, then gives slightly as it is lifted or shifted. Clay surfaces carry a faint coolness that lingers in the hand, especially where the material is thicker. The woven edges of baskets press gently against the fingers, offering a textured grip that adjusts with movement. Fabric ties on sacks slide with a soft friction, tightening or loosening depending on how they are held. These sensations unfold naturally, guiding each interaction without requiring thought. As containers are opened, closed, or adjusted, small actions take place that shape how they are used over time. A lid is lifted and set aside, then returned carefully to its place once the contents have been checked. A basket may be shifted slightly to settle what it holds more evenly, its sides adapting to the weight within. A sack is loosened, then tightened again, its form changing briefly before returning to rest. These actions are repeated in quiet cycles, each one leaving a subtle effect on the container, shaping its condition through continued use. For those familiar with these objects, there is a quiet recognition of how each detail contributes to its function. The way a lid fits, the strength of a weave, the flexibility of fabric all become understood through experience rather than explanation. These small features are not considered separately, but as part of a whole that guides how food is held and protected. In this way, the containers reveal their purpose through interaction, offering a steady presence within the larger process of storage. Along the sides and surfaces of these containers, small markings appear that hint at their making and continued use. On wooden barrels, faint lines run in irregular directions where tools once shaped the staves, leaving behind subtle grooves that catch light differently across the surface. Clay jars carry slight impressions where fingers pressed into soft material before it hardened, forming gentle ridges that remain visible even after years of use. Woven baskets reveal patterns within their structure, alternating strands crossing in sequences that create a quiet rhythm in their design. Even sacks hold faint stitching lines, tracing the path where fabric was joined together. To observe these markings closely is to notice how they interact with the senses in quiet ways. The grooves would create a slight resistance under the fingertips, guiding movement as the hand follows their direction. The uneven surface of clay offers a varied texture, smooth in some areas and slightly raised in others, forming a subtle contrast that can be felt without effort. The woven patterns of baskets create a gentle interplay between firmness and flexibility, responding to pressure with a soft adjustment. Fabric stitching on sacks introduces a faint line of tension, noticeable only when the surface is touched directly. As these containers continue to be used, their markings begin to shift in subtle ways, shaped by contact and time. The grooves may become smoother where hands have passed over them repeatedly, softening their edges without removing them entirely. Clay surfaces may gather faint discolorations where they have been handled or exposed to their contents, creating variations that deepen over time. Basket fibers may compress slightly at points of frequent pressure, adjusting their pattern while maintaining their structure. These changes are gradual, blending into the overall appearance of each container. For those who work with these objects, these markings become part of a quiet recognition that extends beyond appearance. They offer a sense of familiarity, allowing each container to be known through its surface as much as through its shape. The patterns, textures, and slight variations guide the hand in ways that feel natural, creating a connection between the object and its use. In this way, the containers carry a subtle identity, shaped not only by their function, but by the traces of their continued presence within the storage space. In certain corners of the storage rooms, containers are grouped not by type alone, but by how their forms interact with one another. Barrels rest side by side, their curved bodies touching lightly, creating narrow spaces between them that follow the arc of their shape. Clay jars are often placed in clusters, their rounded bases fitting into small variations in the floor, stabilizing them without additional support. Baskets are arranged in stacks or rows, their flexible sides allowing them to settle closely together. Sacks lie in layered arrangements, their surfaces pressing gently against one another, forming soft contours that adapt to weight and space. To move among these groupings is to notice how the presence of one container influences the experience of another. The scent of wood from barrels blends with the faint earthiness of clay, creating a layered atmosphere that shifts depending on where one stands. The woven texture of baskets brushes lightly against nearby surfaces, producing a soft sound that fades quickly into the surrounding air. Fabric sacks carry a quieter presence, absorbing contact rather than reflecting it, adding a subtle softness to the space. Each material contributes differently, creating a combined sensory experience shaped by their arrangement. As containers are added or removed, the balance within these groupings adjusts in small but noticeable ways. A barrel shifted slightly changes the space between it and the next, altering how light falls across their surfaces. The removal of a jar creates an opening that is soon filled by another, maintaining the continuity of the arrangement. Baskets may be res-tacked, their positions changing to accommodate new contents, while sacks are moved and layered again to distribute weight more evenly. These actions reshape the group without disrupting its overall presence. For those who work within these spaces, the relationship between containers becomes an understood part of their environment. The way objects fit together, the spaces they create, and the balance they maintain all contribute to a sense of order that is felt rather than imposed. This understanding allows movement through the space to remain fluid, guided by familiarity with how each container interacts with the others. In this way, storage becomes not only about individual objects, but about the quiet connections formed between them. In quieter sections of the storage rooms, some containers are set apart from the main groupings, placed with a little more space around them. These objects often carry subtle differences in their form, perhaps a jar with a slightly narrower neck, or a barrel made from a different type of wood that gives it a deeper tone. Baskets here may be woven more tightly, their patterns finer and less open than others nearby. Sacks might appear thicker, their fabric layered to hold contents that require a different kind of protection. These variations do not stand out sharply, yet they create a quiet distinction within the overall arrangement. To approach these separate containers is to notice how their presence feels slightly different within the space. The air around them seems less mixed with surrounding materials, allowing their individual scents to become more noticeable. A jar may carry a faint trace of its contents that lingers near its opening, while a wooden barrel may release a deeper, more concentrated note from within its staves. The texture of these objects also feels more defined, as there is less contact with neighboring surfaces to soften their edges. This creates a more focused sensory experience, where each container can be perceived more clearly. Over time, the position of these separated items may shift, though not as frequently as those in more active areas. They are moved with intention, often relocated to maintain a certain balance within the space or to respond to changes in what is being stored. A basket might be brought closer to others when needed, or a jar placed further apart to allow easier access. These adjustments happen quietly, guided by practical understanding rather than visible planning, allowing the space to adapt without losing its overall sense of order. For those who become familiar with these distinctions, there is a quiet recognition of why certain containers are set apart. It is not simply a matter of placement, but of understanding how different forms serve different needs within the larger process. The separation allows each object to hold its purpose more clearly, without interference from surrounding elements. In this way, even the spacing between containers becomes meaningful, contributing to how food is stored and preserved within the calm, enclosed world beneath the castle. At the edges of use, where containers are less frequently handled, their forms begin to reveal a quieter stage of their presence. A barrel may stand slightly apart, its surface showing deeper tones where time has settled into the wood. Clay jars in these areas carry a softer dullness, their surfaces no longer reflecting even the faintest light in the same way as those handled more often. Baskets appear slightly relaxed in shape, their woven sides settling into a gentler curve. Sacks rest with less tension in their fabric, their folds forming naturally without the pull of recent movement. To spend time near these resting containers is to notice how their sensory presence feels more subdued. The scent they carry is less immediate, spreading slowly into the surrounding air rather than rising directly from their surfaces. The texture of wood, clay, and fiber feels softer to the touch, not because the material has changed entirely, but because repeated handling has eased its sharper edges. Even the sound of contact becomes quieter, with surfaces absorbing movement rather than responding to it. These impressions create a gentle shift in how the space is experienced. Occasionally, one of these containers is brought back into use, and a small transformation begins to unfold. A barrel may be rolled forward, its surface catching light in new ways as it moves. A jar is lifted, revealing the contrast between its outer stillness and the activity that resumes around it. Baskets are reshaped slightly as they are filled again, their sides tightening under renewed weight. Sacks are drawn up and carried, their fabric pulling into firmer lines. These changes do not erase their previous state, but add another layer to their ongoing presence. For those who observe these transitions, there is a quiet understanding that containers hold more than their contents. They carry traces of time, of use, and of rest, each phase leaving its mark without fully replacing the last. The difference between active and resting objects becomes something that is felt rather than measured, shaping how the space is perceived. In this way, the containers beneath the castle become part of a larger rhythm, where their form and texture reflect the slow passage of use, pause, and return. Within certain rooms of the castle, the arrangement of preservation takes on a distinct physical form that differs from simple storage. Long wooden racks extend across the space, built in tiers that allow air to move between hanging cuts of meat or bundles of herbs. Hooks are fixed into beams above, each one holding its place with quiet strength. In another area, shallow trays lie arranged on raised platforms, their surfaces covered with grains or sliced foods spread in thin layers. Barrels filled with coarse salt sit nearby, their open tops revealing uneven textures shaped by repeated use and refilling. To enter these spaces is to encounter an atmosphere shaped by gradual processes that unfold over extended periods. The air carries a dense blend of scents, sharp and dry from salt, layered with the deeper, heavier presence of smoke that lingers among the beams. There is a warmth that gathers higher in the room where smoke rises, while closer to the ground the air feels cooler and more grounded. The textures here are felt not only through touch but through breath, as each inhalation carries traces of what is being preserved, forming a quiet connection between the body and the process. Across time, these methods reveal their effect through subtle changes that emerge slowly rather than all at once. Meat hanging from hooks begins to shift in color and firmness, its surface responding to the presence of salt or smoke. Herbs laid across racks lose their initial softness, becoming lighter and more brittle as moisture leaves them. The layers on drying trays adjust as air passes over them, creating slight variations in texture from one section to another. These changes do not announce themselves, but become visible only through patient observation, marking the steady progress of preservation. For those who work within these rooms, there is an understanding that comes from waiting as much as from doing. The processes here cannot be hurried or forced into completion, but must be allowed to unfold in their own time. This creates a different kind of awareness, one that pays attention to gradual transformation rather than immediate results. In this way, preservation becomes less about action and more about presence, where patience itself becomes part of the work, shaping how food is prepared to endure beyond the moment it was gathered. Along one side of the chamber, a shallow hearth supports the slow work of smoking, built from stone that holds heat without sharp intensity. Above it, beams stretch across the ceiling, darkened over time by rising layers of smoke that settle into the wood. Cuts of meat hang at measured distances, suspended from hooks so that each piece receives an even exposure. The arrangement is deliberate, with space left between each hanging form to allow the smoke to pass through without obstruction. Nearby, small piles of wood rest in readiness, chosen for how they burn rather than how quickly they are consumed. To remain near this hearth is to feel a gradual shift in the surrounding atmosphere, shaped by warmth that rises gently rather than pressing outward. The air carries a steady presence of smoke, not sharp or overwhelming, but deep and layered, settling into the senses with quiet persistence. The warmth touches the skin more noticeably at shoulder height, while lower down the temperature feels more balanced. There is a faint dryness that accompanies the smoke, subtly altering the way the air is breathed, creating a steady awareness of the process taking place. As time passes, the interaction between smoke and what it touches begins to reveal itself in quiet ways. Surfaces of meat take on a darker tone, their outer layers adjusting as the smoke continues to pass over them. The beams above gather a deeper coloration, shaped by repeated exposure that builds gradually rather than all at once. Even the air itself seems to carry a continuity, as each new layer of smoke joins what has already settled into the space. These changes are not immediate, but unfold through a steady accumulation that reflects the passage of time. For those who tend this process, there is a quiet attentiveness that centers on maintaining balance rather than creating change. The fire is watched not for intensity, but for consistency, allowing the smoke to rise in a controlled and even manner. There is no urgency in the actions taken here, only a steady presence that supports what is already in motion. In this way, the work becomes an act of guidance rather than force, where the outcome depends on allowing the process to continue at its own pace. In another part of the room, preservation takes form through layers of salt arranged with careful attention. Large wooden troughs stand low to the ground, their interiors lined with coarse grains that gather in uneven surfaces. Pieces of meat are placed within these troughs, set between layers that press gently from above and below. The salt does not fully conceal what lies within, but surrounds it closely, filling spaces and edges where contact can be maintained. Nearby, smaller containers hold additional salt, ready to be drawn upon, their surfaces shifting slightly as each portion is taken. To stand near these troughs is to sense a different kind of presence, shaped more by dryness than by warmth. The air feels lighter here, carrying a faint sharpness that rests at the edge of each breath. The scent is subtle but persistent, a clean, mineral quality that blends with the natural trace of what is being preserved. When touched, the salt feels rough and granular, moving easily under the fingers, while the surfaces it surrounds begin to feel firmer over time. These sensations gather quietly, forming an atmosphere that is distinct from other methods within the same space. As the process continues, the interaction between salt and its contents unfolds gradually, creating small but noticeable changes. The outer layers of meat begin to draw inward slightly, responding to the steady presence of the surrounding grains. Moisture is drawn out and absorbed, altering both the texture of the meat and the appearance of the salt itself, which becomes slightly darker and more compact in certain areas. These shifts do not occur all at once, but progress slowly, revealing their effect through close observation rather than immediate transformation. For those who work with this method, there is a quiet understanding that the role of salt is both simple and precise. It requires no adjustment once placed, yet its presence must be carefully measured at the beginning. The process invites patience, asking for attention not to action, but to timing and proportion. In this way, preservation through salt becomes an exercise in restraint, where the initial placement carries the weight of the outcome, and the passage of time completes what has been quietly set in motion. In a higher, more open part of the structure, drying takes place where air is allowed to move more freely through the space. Wooden frames stand upright or lean against beams, fitted with stretched cords or thin slats that support what is laid across them. Thin slices of food are arranged carefully so that they do not overlap, each piece given its own small portion of space. The structure here feels lighter than in other areas, with more distance between surfaces and fewer enclosing walls. Openings near the top of the room allow air to pass through, guiding the process without drawing attention to itself. To remain in this area is to notice a different quality in the atmosphere, shaped less by density and more by movement. The air feels drier, carrying a faint trace of what is being preserved but dispersing it quickly as it flows. There is a gentle variation in temperature, with cooler currents passing through at intervals, touching the skin lightly before moving on. The scent is more delicate here, never gathering in one place, but shifting gradually as the air changes direction. These sensory details create an environment that feels open and quietly active. Over time, the process of drying reveals itself through gradual transformation across each surface. The pieces laid out begin to lose their weight and softness, becoming lighter as moisture leaves them. Edges may curl slightly, responding to the steady passage of air, while textures shift from pliable to firm. These changes occur unevenly, depending on position and exposure, creating small variations that reflect the subtle differences within the space. The progression is slow, unfolding across hours and days rather than moments. For those who tend to this method, there is an awareness that relies on observation rather than intervention. The placement of each piece is done with care at the beginning, allowing the process to continue without further adjustment. Attention is given to the arrangement and spacing, ensuring that air can reach each surface evenly. In this way, drying becomes a collaboration between material and environment, where the role of the individual is to prepare and then step back, allowing time and air to complete the work. In a quieter corner of the preservation space, another method unfolds through the use of enclosed vessels where liquids surround what is being kept. Clay jars stand with their openings sealed by fitted lids or layers of cloth tied securely in place. Inside, food rests beneath the surface of brine or oil, held in a contained environment that limits its contact with open air. The jars vary in size, some wide and shallow, others tall and narrow, each chosen to suit what they hold. Their placement is steady, often along walls or in slightly cooler sections of the room where temperature supports the process. To be near these vessels is to notice a different kind of sensory presence, one that feels more contained and subtle. The scent is softer, held within the jars and only faintly released at the edges where lids meet clay. There is a slight coolness that lingers around them, influenced by the thickness of the material and the liquid inside. When a lid is briefly lifted, a deeper aroma emerges, richer and more concentrated, before settling again once the vessel is closed. These moments are brief, yet they reveal the quiet activity taking place within. As time passes, the contents of these jars undergo gradual changes that remain mostly hidden from view. The liquid surrounding the food begins to take on new tones, shaped by what it holds, while the textures within adjust slowly beneath the surface. Small movements occur inside, not visible but understood through the shifting balance of scent and weight. The jars themselves show little outward sign of this transformation, yet their role in containing and guiding it remains constant throughout the process. For those who use this method, there is a quiet trust placed in the enclosed space of the vessel. Once sealed, the jar becomes a boundary that holds the process within, requiring little attention beyond occasional checking. This creates a sense of patience that is different from other methods, where the work is largely invisible and unfolds without direct observation. In this way, preservation within liquid becomes an act of containment, where time and enclosure work together to shape what is kept. At the edges of these preservation spaces, there are moments when different methods exist side by side, not in separation but in quiet coexistence. A rack of drying herbs may stand near a row of sealed jars, while beyond them a trough of salt holds its place beside the gentle presence of smoke drifting from a distant hearth. The arrangement is not random, yet it is not rigid either, allowing each method to occupy its own space while remaining part of a larger whole. The room becomes a layered environment, where varied techniques are held together through proximity rather than strict division. To stand within this shared space is to experience a blending of sensations that do not compete but settle into one another. The dryness of air from the racks meets the heavier tone of smoke, while the faint sharpness of salt lingers quietly beneath both. At times, a subtle warmth passes through from one side of the room, while cooler air remains closer to the ground, creating a gentle contrast that shifts as one moves. The scents and textures overlap softly, forming a continuous atmosphere that reflects the presence of multiple processes unfolding at once. Across time, the interaction between these methods creates a subtle rhythm of change that is not tied to any single process. The progress of drying, salting, smoking, and sealing moves at different speeds, yet they coexist within the same passage of days. One area may show visible transformation while another holds its stage of completion more quietly. These variations do not interrupt one another, but instead form a layered sense of time within the room, where multiple stages of preservation are present together. For those who understand this space, there is a quiet awareness that preservation is not a single action but a collection of approaches that work in harmony. Each method carries its own pace and requirement, yet all contribute to the same purpose of extending what has been gathered. The presence of these different processes side by side creates a sense of continuity, where no single moment defines the outcome. In this way, the work of preservation becomes a shared rhythm, shaped by patience and guided by the steady passage of time. Inside the storage rooms, the arrangement of goods follows a quiet structure that reveals itself through careful observation. Barrels are positioned along walls where their curved sides align neatly, creating a continuous line that feels intentional without being forced. Sacks are stacked in layered formations, each one resting upon another in a way that distributes weight evenly across the surface below. Clay jars are grouped in corners, their rounded bases fitting into small variations in the floor, forming stable clusters. Narrow paths remain between these arrangements, allowing movement without disturbing the placement that has already been established. To move through this ordered space is to notice how the arrangement influences the way it is experienced. The air feels slightly different between rows, where stored goods shape how it circulates, creating gentle variations in temperature and scent. The presence of stacked materials softens sound, absorbing small movements and allowing only the closest actions to be heard clearly. The surfaces underfoot change subtly depending on where one walks, from more open areas to those closely bordered by stored items. These sensory details do not stand apart, but quietly reflect the structure of placement within the room. As items are added to the system, their placement follows patterns that have been formed through repeated use rather than explicit instruction. A sack is lifted and placed in alignment with others, continuing a row that already exists. A barrel is rolled into position, its movement guided by the spaces left open for it. When an item is removed, the surrounding arrangement adjusts slightly, maintaining balance without needing to be reorganized entirely. These small actions preserve the overall structure, allowing the space to adapt while keeping its underlying order intact. For those familiar with this environment, the arrangement becomes something understood through presence rather than analysis. There is a quiet awareness of where each type of item belongs, shaped by experience and repeated interaction. The order is not imposed from above, but grows from the way the space has been used over time. In this way, the active placement becomes part of a larger rhythm, where each addition and removal contributes to a system that feels steady, predictable, and quietly maintained. Along the edges of the room, the arrangement begins to reveal a more detailed structure, where placement follows not only shape but also purpose. Heavier containers are set closer to the ground, forming a base that supports what is placed above them. Lighter items are arranged in upper layers, resting on surfaces that can bear their weight without strain. Corners are used with quiet efficiency, holding clusters of goods that fit naturally into their angles. Open spaces are not left empty by accident, but kept clear to allow access, forming pathways that guide movement through the arrangement. To stand within this layered system is to notice how it shapes the atmosphere in subtle ways. The presence of stacked goods creates a sense of enclosure that varies from one area to another, sometimes closer, sometimes more open. The air carries faint differences depending on height, with scents gathering more strongly in lower sections and dispersing as they rise. Sound travels differently here, softening as it passes through layers of material, creating a quieter environment that feels contained. These sensory qualities are not separate from the arrangement, but emerge from it. As time passes, the system of stacking continues to adjust through small, consistent actions. When new goods arrive, they are integrated into existing layers rather than placed apart, extending patterns that are already in place. A stack may grow higher, or a row may lengthen, depending on what is added. If an item is removed, the space it leaves is often filled by shifting nearby goods, maintaining the continuity of the arrangement. These adjustments happen gradually, preserving the overall structure while allowing it to evolve. For those who work within this ordered space, there is a quiet understanding of balance that guides each action. The weight of objects, their shape, and their position all become part of an internal sense that directs placement without the need for instruction. This understanding allows the system to remain stable even as it changes, creating an environment where order is maintained through familiarity. In this way, stacking becomes more than a method of storage. It becomes a practice of quiet organization shaped by experience. Between the larger groupings, smaller arrangements begin to appear, formed by the placement of items that do not follow the main rows or stacks. These are often set along the edges of pathways or tucked into slight gaps where space allows. Small baskets, loose bundles, or partially filled sacks find their place in these areas, shaped by what remains rather than what was planned. The structure here feels more flexible, adapting to the irregularities of both the room and the goods themselves. Even so, these smaller placements do not appear scattered, but instead follow a quiet logic that keeps them within reach and within order. To move past these in-between spaces is to notice a shift in how the environment feels at a smaller scale. The air carries a more mixed presence here, shaped by the variety of items gathered in close proximity. Scents overlap gently, creating a layered atmosphere that changes subtly from one step to the next. The ground may feel slightly more uneven, where objects rest closer to the edges of the walkway, narrowing the space and guiding movement with quiet pressure. These details create a sense of variation within the larger system. As these smaller placements change over time, they reflect a different rhythm than the main structures of stacking and alignment. Items may be moved more frequently, adjusted to make room for others or to allow easier access. A basket might shift from one corner to another, or a sack may be lifted and placed closer to a main row. These actions are brief and often unnoticed, yet they contribute to the ongoing adaptation of the space. The arrangement remains coherent, even as these smaller adjustments continue. For those familiar with the storage room, these in-between areas become part of an unspoken understanding of how space is used. They offer flexibility within a system that might otherwise feel rigid, allowing for variation without disorder. The presence of these smaller placements shows that organization is not only about structure, but also about responsiveness. In this way, the order of the room includes both stability and adjustment, working together to support the quiet flow of storage. Near the center of the room, the arrangement takes on a slightly different form, shaped by the need for access rather than long rest. Here, items are placed in shorter rows that allow easier reach from multiple sides, creating a more open pattern within the overall structure. Barrels may be positioned with small gaps between them, and sacks are arranged in lower stacks that do not rise as high as those near the walls. Clay jars are spaced with intention, leaving enough room for careful handling. The layout here reflects a balance between order and availability, where placement supports both storage and use. To stand within this central area is to experience a quieter shift in how the space feels. The air moves more freely between the shorter rows, carrying a blend of scents that feel less concentrated than in the denser sections. The openness allows sound to travel a little further before it softens, creating a subtle difference in how movement is perceived. There is a sense of lightness in this part of the room, not from brightness, but from the way space is allowed to exist between objects. This creates an atmosphere that feels gently active without being crowded. As items are handled here, the pattern of placement responds more directly to immediate needs. A sack may be moved forward to be accessed more easily, then returned to its place once its contents are used. A jar might be shifted slightly to allow space for another item, adjusting the arrangement without altering its overall structure. These movements occur with quiet consistency, shaping a pattern that is more dynamic than the outer edges of the room. The system remains intact, even as it accommodates these small changes. For those who work within this central space, there is a quiet awareness of how placement supports both storage and movement. The arrangement is not only about keeping items secure, but also about allowing them to be reached when needed. This creates a sense of balance that is felt through repeated experience, guiding how objects are positioned and repositioned over time. In this way, the center of the room becomes a place where order and use meet, forming a steady rhythm within the larger structure of storage. Along certain sections of the storage room, the vertical use of space becomes more noticeable, where height is considered as carefully as ground placement. Wooden frames and simple supports allow items to be stacked upward in measured layers, creating structures that rise gradually rather than abruptly. Barrels may form a lower base, while lighter containers are positioned above them, each level following the shape of what lies beneath. The arrangement appears balanced, with no single point carrying too much weight. The upper edges of these stacks align with the contours of the room, fitting into the space with quiet precision. To observe these vertical arrangements is to notice how the environment shifts as the eye moves upward. The air feels slightly warmer near the higher levels, where it gathers more easily, carrying faint traces of what is stored below. The scent becomes lighter and more dispersed, spreading gently through the upper space. Sound behaves differently here as well, with softer echoes forming between elevated surfaces. The experience of the room changes with height, creating layers not only of objects, but of atmosphere that reflect the structure of stacking. As items are added to these vertical formations, the process unfolds with careful attention to balance and stability. A container is lifted and placed onto an existing layer, its position adjusted until it rests securely within the structure. If a higher level begins to feel uneven, small shifts are made below to support it, ensuring that the entire stack remains steady. When items are removed, the layers above may be lowered or rearranged to maintain the same sense of balance. These actions occur gradually, shaping the height of the arrangement over time. For those familiar with this use of vertical space, there is an understanding that extends beyond simple stacking. The relationship between weight, shape, and height becomes part of an internal awareness that guides each placement. This awareness allows the structure to grow upward without losing its sense of stability, creating an environment where space is used fully but never strained. In this way, vertical stacking becomes a quiet extension of order, adding depth to the system of placement within the room. At the far edges of the storage room, where activity becomes less frequent, the arrangement takes on a slower rhythm shaped by longer intervals between use. Here, stacks are formed with greater patience, often left undisturbed for extended periods, allowing their structure to settle more deeply into place. Barrels rest in firm alignment, their weight pressing evenly into the ground, while sacks form lower, broader layers that spread outward rather than upward. Clay jars are positioned with careful spacing, creating small clearings around them that protect their stability. The order in these areas feels more settled, shaped by time as much as by placement. To stand within these quieter sections is to notice a difference in how the space is experienced. The air carries a more blended presence, where individual scents soften into a gentle background rather than standing apart. Sound becomes more distant, with fewer interruptions to disturb the quiet arrangement. The sense of enclosure feels deeper here, not because of tighter space, but because of the way the arrangement holds itself together. These sensory impressions create an atmosphere that feels grounded, where the structure of placement shapes how the room is perceived. As time passes, the changes in these areas unfold slowly, often marked only by subtle shifts rather than active movement. A stack may settle slightly as materials adjust under their own weight, or a small gap may appear where items have shifted over long periods. When something is eventually removed, the surrounding arrangement may hold its shape rather than collapsing inward, reflecting the stability that has developed over time. These changes are quiet and gradual, forming a different kind of movement that is measured across longer spans. For those who understand this part of the storage room, there is a recognition that order can exist not only through constant attention, but through the way structures are allowed to rest. The arrangement here reflects a trust in the system that has been built, where stability comes from careful placement at the beginning and patience afterward. In this way, the outer edges of the room reveal another layer of organization, one that depends less on adjustment and more on the quiet endurance of what has already been set in place.